kind of prepare your presentation. I will present you. I have a short bio of every one of you for the rest of the audience. So let me first present Latif Dramani, who is graduate in economics and PhD in economics from the University Cheikh Anta Diop of Dakar, Senegal. He is professor of economics at the University of Thiès and coordinator of the Center for Research in Economics and Applied Finance of Thiès, representative of the NTA International Executive Council for Francophone Africa. He is also the coordinator of the Regional Center of Excellence for Research in Generational Economics. Affiliated with several programs within universities around the world, which includes Manchester, Berkeley, Parakou, Cape Town, Hawaii at Manoa, Toronto, Cocody, and Ibadan. Latif carries out research in the following main areas: developing issues sustainable under the prism of the demographic dividend and the generational economy, poverty dynamics, unpaid household work and women's contribution to GDP, and finally, the national and local integrations of economies. So, really able please, Latif, can you share your presentation with us, and whenever you're ready, please start.
Recording in progress.
Great.
Latif là va commencer.
Whenever you want to start, Latif.
Hi, can you hear me, George?
Yes, I can hear you perfectly now.
Okay.
Thank you.
1 minute. I have some. Okay. Thank you, George. Thank you, Beatrice, and all the community for inviting me at this this conference webinar. Then I think I have 50 minutes. My presentation will be on the be on NTTA, National Time Transfer Account. I want to thank Gretchen and Beatrice and all the community of researchers who work on these fields, and also for all the support I have, and also my center and African community for this work. Then I will share here the experience of valuing unpaid housework in Burkina Faso and Senegal. And this is the outline of the presentation. I will directly present the results, as we have few times for this panel. Then I will present the result of NTTA in Burkina Faso for 2018, and after the result of Senegal 2011, and the cross-country comparison, and after the next step I have to present. Then for the results in Burkina Faso, Burkina Faso have its first time use survey in 2018, and we helped them analyze this time use survey by using NTTA methodology. And I have the privilege here to share the flow. That is the flow of production of the time flows of production and consumption of care services in Burkina Faso 2018. Then you have in Apsis age, and we can see easily that men, men and women, they consume the consumption is the same shape, but the production of time, which is blue here, is very little for men's, and you see on the life cycle is very high for the women's, and we have now you can see also that under 10 years and between 10 to 20 years there is more than two hours, for example, more than 2 hours times per day. That's per day for in Burkina Faso, and that is very important for the challenge and the competition between men and women, girls and boys when they're going to school, and that's a big issue here in some of the countries in Africa. And this is the table. We try to have a synthesis table. We can see that for the production of care, we have between 5 to 20 years, for example, female, the women, they give 1 hour, for example, and for other house production, they spend they produce 15 hours, and we can compare them to men's in this column. For example, we can see that it's no more than 2 hours per week. That is per week here. And here we can have the consumptions for the care consumptions, which is around 4 hours per week for in consumption. And we see that the production of time is very big for women's between 5 to 50 years, and all the 50 years and plus, they spend more than 11 hours, and if you combine it, that is very big in per week. And when we value this housework in Burkina Faso 2018, we use we estimate all this at the generalist costs in the market, and is a share of GDP. And I will give just the big picture. Here we can see that for men's, that is 2.3% of GDP of production, and for women we have 30%, and for all 32%. That's very important. And all this is a black part of the GDP, which is not. We don't have those information. This is just a new information in the system. Don't by English. And for cooking, you can see, for example, men's they don't do it. It's at more, and the female and women's, they spend 50 hours. No, not 50 years. 50 or 15% of GDP for cooking. We have here fetching water, 6%. I just want to give information that as Burkina Faso is a Sahel countries, then we have is near to Sahara, and we have this problem of fetching water, which take a lot of times and we see it, and we have this contrast between men and women in the housework activities. Care work, here we have 2% of GDP for women, and for male we have 0.3%. That's very low for male in contrast of women. And that is Burkina Faso. This is a new estimation for the countries, and there are a big campaign of advocacy to try to avoid this time, which is used for fetching waters and cookings, which take a lot of times in the house activity, and which have a big consequence on the production of the market. And now I'm go to the case of Senegal. For Senegal, we have we use a whole data, which is the national survey on poverty in 2011, which have time use modules. And we can see here that in red plane we have the production of women over the life cycle, and we have the production of men in black, which is very, very low, around per day 30 minutes per day. And the consumption, we see that the consumption is very important for child, that is care. And after is the consumption also is very important for men's after 45 years, because they live, they don't have work, and they are at home, and they consume a lot of time. And also here we have a problem of time contrast between men and women, because at, for example, age 15, if we project, we see that girls, they give around three hours per day, and boys is around 30 minutes, and they need to have the same result, for example, at school, and that is a big disadvantage for girls to have a good performance at school. And that's very important for us to have equity, gender equity in Senegal. And that's the synthesis per week, the time production and consumption at home. And we see here that is the same shape like Burkina Faso, but there is some difference, because for care, for example, the consumption of care is very big, 20 hours per week. And we can see that the production also for men's, for women's is also very, very big. For care production, we have 21 to 50 years, for example, 18 hours per week. And for other production, we have 20 hours per week. And that is very, very big agenda, I think, for per week. It's very, very heavy for women. And when we value in additionality costs also in Senegal, is all unpaid housework is 28%, and the contribution, the share of women is 19%, and for male we have 9%. And for Senegal we have care work, which take a lot of time. We have here, for example, 8% compared to 3% of GDP for male and female. We have cooking, which take 3.5% of GDP compared to 1.2% for male. And also, this is a new result because we have also shopping, which is around 3% for women compared to 1.5% of for men. And now when we present this result, the Ministry of Social Affairs and Genders use it to do his policy, and a new policy, and those policies are now in the pipeline of assembly at the parliament, for the parliament, and they try to have a new perspective of this care work in Senegal. And now, when we try to compare the two countries, Senegal and Burkina Faso, to have a quick look, we see that there is a difference on time production in Senegal for the age between 21 to 50 years. They produce more times, for example, than Burkina Faso. And male also, women also produce more time in Senegal than Burkina Faso. And the same country, those two countries are silent countries, but the social norms is not the same. In Senegal, when the religion is very important than Burkina Faso, where social norm is not the same, and in these two countries. And when we compare also the valuing of these two countries, we can see that Burkina Faso, the contribution, the share of cooking is more important, 15% than Senegal, and the care work is more important in Senegal than Burkina Faso. That is the big result we want to share here, and also for the others, for the other example, not the other example. The way forward is now we need with this result to do the campaign and advocacy for gender equity for girls and boys at school, because girls they take more time at home, they do homework, and they spend a lot of times, and they need to have the same results at the end of the years than boys at school. And this is like a gap, a very big gap, and we need to see to have policies intervention for that. And also for those countries, we are now working to elaborate an annual time use reports for Senegal and Burkina Faso, and also we advocate them in the region to have each 3 years a new time use survey to have data and evidence to address these issues. And in the meantime, that's the promotion of girls and women's schooling and literacy campaign, the empower women's access to economic resource, because they take a lot of time for doing unpaid work, and then they can go to the markets. Okay, and at long term, take action to reduce all forms of discrimination and gender inequalities. Okay, thank you for the attention. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. We have lots of time for questions with Latif. If I remember well, because Piedad and Jordana and Gretchen are all co-hosts, they cannot raise their hands. for some weird Zoom rule. But normally, please raise your hands unless you are one of the co-hosts, and just I guess you have to talk kindly for up in order. So, does anyone have a question for Latif? Because Gretchen, please.
Latif, I was very interested to hear that Senegal is having policy changes working their way through the assembly. And I just wanted to ask you a little more about that. So specifically, what is in that bill or policy change?
You have the microphone off if you are talking.
Okay, thanks, Gretchen. Now we are this last after engenders asked us to give a report to produce a report based on this evidence, and also to present to produce a policy brief for the ministry as they now in the action plan of the president. His new action plan is to give more attention of women of PSA in Senegal. That's the new action plan of the government. Then and now they want to they said us that okay, we want to have your evidence. There are two ministries: Ministry of Social Affairs and Ministry of Microfinance. They need this evidence to know now. Okay, what we want, what the action, which action they will take, and the policy change now is they say that they will have now a cash transfer, and they need that we disaggregate the result at regional level to have the impact, more impact at the regional for the targeting to a fine targeting of population in this with these issues. And they have we have a big program for Ministry of Gender and Social Affairs to give cash transfer for populations which have this problem. That is in terms of action. That is at economic level. The new I can see the new deal for which now in the table of the parliament at the parliament. And we have the other problems, which the other issues, which is discrimination and so. But according to our results, now they want to do to target the population with this issue and to give for girls and in rural areas in general, which have who have this problem. They call it some aids to go to school, and they help their families. They call it like in French they call it bourse familiale. They give money to the family to help the family doing the housework, and in exchange, the girls go to school. See, that is now the program we have here in Senegal, in which is in line with those results. But all this is we start. We do it. They do it step by step. That's the policy change. Yes.
Latif, I have one short comment question because I am very impressed with one of your figures, especially the fetching water data point. Because if I read your table correctly, in Burkina Faso, we're talking about that it's represented, the fact that women go and bring water, it's 6% of GDP. And it's way more than men, but I mean, it's not only important in terms of the gap, but in terms of how high it is. So I think there is kind of a straightforward policy action, which probably relatively easy to sell to a major funding institution like the World Bank. If you kind of work on building aqueducts, which I understand is, it's not that easy, but with foreign investment, probably you can work on that because it will have two effects. Well, probably you will have drinking water, actually more, I guess, drinking water, and you will also reduce the gender gap in terms of the use of time quite a bit. And I think, I don't know if you have thought about this, talked about this with any agencies or the government, or how are you dealing with this really interesting number you came up with today?
Yes. Thank you, George. For me, it's this result is amazing for me also because I know Sahel countries, but when we value the times and when we see the times gap, it's okay. The first things we ask them, our specialist teams in Burkina Faso, is why is it plausible? Is it what is the likelihood of this result? They said us, oh yeah, because here in the big problem we have in Burkina Faso is to have water. Is that our big problem if you go out of the capital, which is Ouagadougou, and our women's, because it's the job of the women's, the social norms is the job of women to go to fetch water, and they spend a lot of time for women because we don't have it. And now I think that I agree with you that it's very huge, the gap, and when we value it also is very huge, and there's a need to take action for this this discrimination, because it's a discrimination also because water is life. They don't have it, and women take all the time, all the times, because all the result we show here is mean. But when we decompose it by rural and urban, it will very, very different also, and more important in rural areas. Yes, and now I think that this result we have it in 2019. And last year, because of COVID, we don't the interaction with Burkina Faso team is not so big. And now I think that they are in the step of take all those information and for develop an advocacy and an advocacy tools and an advocacy message to the with stakeholders, and also for all the social the civil society, because I know that a big interest of World Bank when they see these results. They say, okay, Burkina Faso is, for example, a SWED country. SWED is Sahel Women Employment and Demographic Dividend. And when World Bank see it, they will say, oh, we need that all our countries. Now there are 9 countries in the SWED program. All the countries, it's important for them to have time use data and have the same analysis. And that's very important in terms of community and at local, regional policy action.
Thank you, Latif. I think we can move on. Piedad, please share your presentation while I introduce you. So we're going to have now Piedad talking about the Colombian NTTA project. She is an associate professor in the Department of Statistics of the National University of Colombia and director of the Demographic and Epidemiological Observatory at the same university. She holds a PhD in demography at the University of Berkeley and has received several honors as being the recipient of the Distinguished Visiting Professor at Stanford University 2011 and Visiting Professor Santo Domingo at Harvard University 2015. Throughout her career, she has received several competitive research grants and is one of the leaders in research on population issues for Latin America. The research agenda covers issues of underreporting of mortality, mortality projections and conversions in Latin America, the effects of aging and time use, and adolescent fertility. She co-directs and manages the Latin American Human Mortality Database and directs the chapter for Colombia of the International Project National Transfer Accounts and Counting Wounds work, and is the executive director for Latin America, the NTA Global Project. So please, 20 minutes, yeah.
Okay, thank you, Jorge. And thank you everyone for being here in this event. I'm really happy, very excited to see the results, and I just cannot thank enough for Gretchen for creating this methodology. What I'm going to show you today with the Latif presentations, it will follow NTTA methodology, but I just want to point out that there's discrimination within discrimination. In Latin America, we suffer from high informality issues in the labor market. Thus, the combination of the gender discrimination and the informality will create a double burden for women. And that is something that we have to advocate for as well. So we have to fight against labor market informality because it really reduces many possibilities for people, and it produces lower income. It, of course, leaves people without social protection, health, and pension system. But at the same time, it widens the gap between genders as well. So I have done this work with Professor Jorge Tovar. We had used the 2016 National Time Survey. That's the latest available for Colombia. I also want to thank DANE for doing those. There are 2 time use surveys in Colombia at this point. This is the latest one, and we hope they keep on doing more, because it's, as Latif pointed out, it is the bone of this methodology, and it's really important when we want to measure things like that. And not only when we want to measure things like that, but to prepare for aging. We all know that time use will be key to prepare for all the challenges that the aging produces. So, as I said, we just want to explore what's going on between labor market participation, informality, and the time we devote to domestic production by gender in Colombia. So when we look at the census data, the latest census available in Colombia, about 4 out of 10 households are female-headed. So this is also a transformation, a social transformation in Colombia that goes hand in hand with the demographic transition. This has been observed in other latitudes, other countries that have already gone through this process. And this is something that will keep on moving on as well in Colombia. At the same time, 46.8% of the Colombian workforce is employed in the informal sector. So when we take the basic statistics, or when you see here in this table is the average household structure between female-headed and male-headed households. When you look at these variables, household head age, household number of members, members under age 12, 18, and subsidized social security and satisfy basic needs, there's not much of a difference. The only thing that really makes a difference is the household head partner. So male-headed households, almost 80% of them have a partner, while female-headed households, only 20% have a partner. So it's reversed basically. So this is a big difference when we talk about female-headed households. So these women are basically raising their children or their dependents on their own, while male-headed households, they have a companion or a partner who is helping them with everything. It's not only household production, but everything else. So that makes a huge difference when we talk about female-headed households. Also, so in this table, let me show you how it was presented. The left pane has the statistics for males who live in male-headed households or female-headed households, while the one at the right has the statistics for females who are living in male-headed households or female-headed households. So when we do this difference and we look at what happens, this is anyone who is living in a household or any male who's living in a household that is male-headed or female-headed. So it's anyone, it's the head, but also all other members. And the same we do here for females. So once and again, when we look at these average characteristics per household, when we talk about sanitary facilities, not how to read, age, the score of the unsatisfied basic needs, poverty, they are very similar. There are differences, there are some differences, but in general, they look very much alike for both males or females in each of these male or female headed household. So what makes the difference is the housework production. And within housework production is care production. It has been found by us in the past with the previous time use survey, and again in this time use survey, that the activity that consumes the most time for females is care production, the activity of the housework within the housework activities. So this is why we have pointed out that one in particular here. So most of the time that women devote for housework production is care. So when we count them for as hours per week, so we see that females in either male or female headed household devote a lot more time than male, like almost 3 times more. And that happens, it doesn't matter who is the household head, if it's a male or a female. So it's 3 more hours if the women are in a male headed household, and it's a little bit less if they are in a female headed household. So this is very important to point out in this kind of production that we're seeing in Colombia. So men in male-headed households dedicate more time to care production, mainly because men in female-headed households tend to be children and elderly, because they are not the partner. Just remember the previous statistic that I presented to you. So here we can see the difference between male household head and female household head. The one in the left is male household head. So what we have in the left and the vertical axis is the difference in hours per day of the time devoted to each of these activities. So it's female minus male. That means that everything that is positive is basically a female activity, while everything that is negative is male activity. So as you can see, there are some differences between female and male-headed households. What is clear is that in male-headed household, men devote a lot more time to market work at all ages than what happens in female-headed household, basically. due to the fact that the female-headed household do not have a partner, or most of the households do not have a partner with them. So this explains this difference. And as well, we can see there's a slight difference between housework, not only between hours, which is not that much, but the shape of the chair is very different. So in male-headed household, women devote a lot more to housework at all ages, but starting very, very early. Since age 15, we can see the difference. While in female-headed household, they tend to postpone a little bit farther. There are other differences that are not that big, but that are relevant to point out, and is the difference between sleep and leisure and self-care. So it goes up and down between male and female activities when people are in a male-headed household, while in a female-headed household, it's always a male activity. So again, this may be explained by the fact that most of the men or males living in female-headed household are children, while in here you have several ages combinations. So this, I just wanted to point it out that in Colombia, we are able, thanks to the amazing time use survey that we have, to produce the production care in time in hours per week, as you can see in this slide, for all ages, not only childcare. So at this point, most of the time is consumed for children 4 and under, then followed by children 5 to 18. And women produce most of the time for production care, basically since age 20. And as kids get older, then it moves a little bit into the 30s. We produce very little for adults or elderly at this point. So just look at the hours that are counted in here. So it's almost 20 hours in the peak for children 4 and under, and almost 10 hours for children between 5 to 18. But it's almost 2.5 hours for other adults and elderly. It doesn't mean that it's not going to shift or change in the future. So once we age, probably these figures will change. But at this point, care is a lot of time that women spend in the housework production, and most of it is for children under 5. So that's also another point that we need to think about when we think about policy. Well, now I just want to show you what we have done in terms of this duality between formality and informality in Colombia. So informality is not so easy to, or not so straightforward to measure. There are several measures that you can think of. At least 7 of them are proposed in the literature in Colombia, and I'll let you know how we will split it. So how we're focusing in this case is whoever is paying Social Security is formal. Whoever is missing those payments then is informal. So that's the definition that we're following in this document. Once again, we have split information. The statistics for males in the formal market or informal market, and the statistics for females in formal market and informal market. Again, for any other characteristic that you see here, they are very similar. There's not that big of a difference. The important difference is household production, and within household production, care production. Again, women produce 3 times, almost 4 in this case, times what men do, whether they are in the formal or the informal market. But if they are in the formal, they do even more. Thus, as I just said, we use subsidized Social Security as a proxy to measure informality in the job market. And we find that women within households that participate in the informal market work produce more housework, and that is due basically to care. So as expected, both women and men that participate in the informal market work are poorer than formal market workers. So when we look at the informal household, or the household informality, so what I just presented to you is when we split people or each person in the household. Now we want to characterize households because, as we saw at the beginning, female-headed households have difference in their structure, in their basic structure. Most of male-headed households do have a partner, while most of female-headed households do not have a partner. So we believe that makes a difference. So because of that, we believe that informality has to be measured not by persons, not by each individual, but by households. So we have decided to account for household informality, not individuals' informality, but by household informality. Because housework production is done by household. So we need to do or structure everything per household. So how have we defined household informality? When we have the majority of the members that are informal, then that household will be informal. And when the minority will be formal, then those will be informal. So we double check this definition that we are taking into account, and we contrasted it with other possibilities like focusing on individual informality or only the head of the household or the head of the household partner. So they are very close. It's not that's very different from what we are thinking of, but it's important. We believe that still, even if they are very close, if we take one of these other definitions, it will make a slight difference, but it could be important at the end. So thinking that, or having in mind that we are measuring everything per household and that informality relates to payments to the social security system, that's how we have constructed the following statistics. So this is the time used per formal paid work. So this is formal households. And the difference between formal and informal household and what they do and how they distribute their time. It is presented in these two graphics. And we can see that informal market workers have to spend a lot more time working, which makes sense. If you haven't paid or make contributions to the social security system, then you will probably have to spend more time working even after retirement ages. So once the retirement age, which is between 55 and 60 in Colombia, once that age hits, then we see a huge reduction in formal market work, but we don't see that fast of a reduction. We see it, but it's not as fast as it happens in the formal market. In terms of housework, we see that there is a postponement in the ages, in the early ages in housework, while it is not in the informal market. And basically it's due to care. So probably those enrolled in the informal market do also have, or do not only have this structural composition of only by gender, but also having children at early ages, probably. And when we compare this and we start to split within all the things that we are trying to look at, we look at female household head and formal market, while against male household head in formal markets. So when we look at the difference per gender, female on the left, male on the right, then we see that males get to work a lot more, even if they are in the formal market, while women cannot devote that much time. Housework is very similar in both cases. Care is very similar, except that women have to devote a lot more of care during those ages. So it's not only while they are in their early 20s or 30s when they are taking care of children, but also later on time. So this is probably what we have called the sandwich generation, that is taking care of other people at all other ages. And once again, when we look at the sleep and leisure, we see some differences as well. Now, if we do the same contrast, but in the informal market, as I said, the market work is very masculine, and then when we split it by household head, then we see that this is due basically to male household heads. And while housework is bigger as well in these households, because they do have a partner, while it's not the same for women, but we see that the time devoted to care across all ages, like if we measure this in terms of areas under the curve, it will be much bigger for female household heads than for male household heads. So women in the informal male-headed household produce the most housework at all ages. Men between 15 and 80 years old produce the least housework independent of the household head gender. So it seems as informality pushes households to dedicate more time to housework production activities. So it's just the combination of, or the layers of discriminations or problems in the labor market that combined with gender leads to these results. Production care profiles show a similar pattern to that of the household production profiles. So results suggest that women in the informal headed household produce more care time at almost every age. So it's not only concentrated in their 20s, early 30s, but at almost every age. And that's what really matters to us. That was one of the discoveries that we did. While formal males produce slightly more care time than informal males. So we did a preliminary regression analysis, trying to understand, trying to measure this relationship that we saw here. So we have in the first column, the unpaid housework. Second column is unpaid housework, but we have different variables measuring here. And then we try to spare childcare as well. Everything is measured in hours per week. And what we find is that women explain most of this difference, and that age is also following this shape of inverted U, which explains a lot. Once and again, it is childcare where it's taking the most time of women, but as I just pointed out, for informal women, the effect expands to other ages as well. So,
have two minutes.
Perfect, I'm almost done. Regression results are consistent with the NTTA profiles that I just showed you. And these results suggest that women in formal and informal households dedicate more time to unpaid housework and childcare activities than men. The results of these regressions suggest that the gender gap between men and women is wider in informal households than informal ones. So these results are also consistent for childcare in the columns that we presented at the end. So female-headed households are smaller than male-headed households, mainly because these women are single or do not have a partner. Women in female-headed households usually produce less housework and care time than females in male-headed households. Nevertheless, women in the formal female-headed household dedicate less time to housework and care activities than women in informal female-headed household. So there is this double pressure for informal women. Informality and the sex of the household head do not seem to affect significantly the time men dedicate to housework and care activities. So just as a final remark, I just want to point once and again that is this double burden, females and informality, when they combine, they create like the worst of the possibilities for women. And that opens the door for policy that should target basically these women. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. I was talking by myself because the mic was off. I was saying also hello to Juan Daniel. Really nice to have you here. And do you have any questions? I don't think it's fair for me to ask questions about what we did, but if you have some questions, it would be great for us. Gretchen, please.
Thank you. I am really interested to see the analysis that you did by household structure. I think that's relatively new in the whole project, which when you think about it is sort of astounding that we haven't focused on that as much. But looking at those results, it seemed to suggest a different way to discuss the gender gaps in unpaid care work. That it was almost, we're always talking about the burden of unpaid care work on women, but it seemed to give a focus to the benefit, the access that men have to unpaid care work of others in their households. And do you think that that would maybe make, what do you think about how we could change the conversation that way? Would that help? Would that make more space for possible policy changes, sort of getting away from constantly talking about the burden as opposed to the access to care?
Definitely. Since the whole structure of the NTTA is the household, then it made sense to make it like that, because it's like a public production of something, you know, within the households. So that's the way we start to see this. And as I said at the end, I think it will be very important when we try to target a particular population, you know, struggling against informality, it's a struggle for the whole economy. But we have to start little, like we cannot change the whole economy overnight. So we can start targeting, you know, probably one little piece of the whole economy. So yes, women, of course, or younger men, I don't know. I mean, start for wherever you want, but this is definitely targeting a small population that could push or could create a spillover effect, which is at the end what we think of. And that really puts in the middle of the discussion housework production and care, particularly care, which is what consumes the most time.
Thank you.
Okay, we had a question from Latif about the average size of households in Colombia, and Juan gave a precise answer, 3.1, according to the last census. I don't know if you have a follow-up with that, Latif, or are we good to move on? Okay, any more questions? Okay, so I guess we are 5 minutes ahead of schedule. Jordana will.
Yes,
Yes, it's Latif.
Yes, please. Excuse me, George. One question to Beatrice. How, according to the results she found, how social norms is Colombia works to, because we see that we are in Latin America, you are very close to America, and for US, we are close to US. And I want to know how social norms barriers work in Colombia, if compared to our reality here in Africa, where social norms is very very strong, very heavy. Is this have an impact of the result you found? Thank you.
Thanks, Latif, for the question. Well, the social norms are not as strict as in countries in Africa. They are very average compared to Western countries. It's not as released as in advanced economies, let's say Western Europe or Northern America, Canada and the US, but is much more relaxed than in least developed countries or Muslim countries. So women do educate more on average in Colombia. Actually, the average number of years for women is 12, while for men is 11. So that shows a lot of the change, of the social change. And but participation rates have a 20% points gap in Colombia for the past decade, indeed, before the pandemic. So it's more liberal, I will say, but is not the main determinant. I will also say. I think our main concern is basically this duality in the labor market that we have. Inequality and informality are huge in Latin America and particularly in Colombia, and that really is creating these gaps.
Okay, thank you.
Okay,
Piedad.
thanks. Thank you.
Thank you, Latif. So we're going to move on. Jordana, please prepare your presentation while I introduce you. So we are happy and excited to have Jordana Cristina de Jesus, who is a professor in the Department of Demography and Actuarial Sciences at the Federal University of Rio Grande do Norte. She holds a PhD in demography from CEDEPLAN, which is the Center for Regional Development and Planning in Brazil, and her research focuses on gender, family, and unpaid domestic work. Please, you have 20 minutes for the presentation, Jordana, when you're ready.
Thank you, Tovar. Good morning, afternoon to all the colleagues. First of all, I would like to thank Piedad and Tovar for this invitation. It is an honor to share this roundtable with all of you. Today, I will talk about the gender difference in time transfers over the life course in Brazil. In studies I have been working on together with Simone Weiman and Cássio Turra. Brazil is an attractive case for NTTA analysis. Firstly, because we have substantial female labor force participation, but the role of women in the household has not changed. The social norm is that women should be more responsible for caring for the household, children, elderly, and other dependent individuals. And moreover, the public provision and subsidy of childcare services to support families is limited. We have a low proportion of children aged 0 to 3 years old attending childcare. The access to preschool programs are based on raffle in many cities, and they are not available to all families in need. Besides, full-time daycare is rarely available in Brazil. And as a consequence of the sexual division of labor, the cultural context, and the limited public provision of care, Brazilian society has a high demand for paid domestic work. And the female participation in the labor market is strongly related to the hiring of domestic workers in Brazil. What you can see is that the worst case happens for women from low-income families. They are more penalized by unpaid housework, and they face more difficulties at entering and remaining in the labor market. And this fits back the cycle of inequalities in Brazil. Although we represent a very interesting case, we have some limitations for studying it. First, because time use data are extremely limited in Brazil, particularly if compared to other countries in Latin America. Unfortunately, we do not have any time use surveys, and this limitation has hindered the study of unpaid care and housework in the country. There is a single information about time use in Brazil, the number of hours per week people dedicate to household services. So considering the Brazilian context and this limitation, our recent research agenda has at least two objectives. The first one is to estimate time transfers from a single piece of information, hours of household services per week. And after that, our objective is to explore inequalities in time transfers over the life cycle and according to markers of social inequality in Brazil, such as gender, race, education, and their interactions. So the first step is to adjust Brazilian data. We draw data from the PNAD, a national representative survey in Brazil. As I have mentioned, the only piece of information about time use we have is the total time spent on housework services. This type of information seems to have some limitations. International comparisons show notably fewer hours of unpaid household services in Brazil than in other countries in Latin America, and we have some evidence of underreporting of direct care. So we have estimated time use age schedules for selected countries in Latin America and the Caribbean and compared them to Brazil. We have included estimates from Colombia, and thank you for this available of data, Paraguay, Peru, and Costa Rica, countries for which microdata are publicly available. Panel A shows the average number of daily hours of total household services by age for women in each country. Brazilian estimates not only show lower, but also display a different age pattern. In panel B, we have excluded hours devoted to unpaid direct care activities from the other 4 countries' data, and now we can offer additional evidence of the Brazilian data issues. By limiting the estimates, the age schedules become much like the Brazilian one, particularly in Colombia and Paraguay. This result supports our suspicion that hours spent on direct care are underreported in Brazilian data. Now we provide the same type of estimates for men. We can see that the same age pattern issues also show up. And given the limitations and potentialities of Brazilian data, we propose a methodology first to correct the underreported of unpaid direct care in the Brazilian data. We assume that the same relationship between the number of hours spent on direct and indirect care in Brazil as in a reference population. We used a modified version of the indirect standardization demographic method, and we choose to use Colombia as reference population. The Colombia Time Use Survey allows us to identify among household residents who provided and who received direct care, and this improves our methodology. And finally, Colombia and Brazil are neighboring countries in South America with similar social, economic, and demographic stories. We estimate sets of ratios K, representing the ratios between hours allocated to unpaid direct care and indirect care, and they were calculated by gender, age, occupational status, locality of residence, and the type of household arrangement, considering the presence of children, 0 to 5 years old, 6 to 14 years old, and also the presence of elderly. After that, after calculating the ratios for Colombia, we apply them to the Brazilian data, so we can find the estimated unreported time of direct care in Brazil. And finally, we add the estimates of unpaid direct care to the regional profiles of housework services in Brazil reported in the Brazilian data. These figures compare total unpaid household services by gender and age in Brazil with and without the corrections on data. The bimodal shape becomes more visible with the adjusted data, making the child care age peak stand out. And we think that our imputation method was able to fix at least part of the Brazilian time use problems. So now we have at least 2 groups of household services for Brazil: direct care and other household services. This is what makes it possible to advance in NTTA analysis in Brazil. So after adjusting Brazilian data, we applied the methodology suggested by Donehower to generate the NTTA. And after that, we investigate net time transfers by gender, race, and level of education, performing analysis of age profiles and models based on microdata. So this is the big picture about market and household production in Brazil. 63% of all market production in Brazil is performed by men, and 82%, on the other hand, of all the household production is performed by women. And here we have the age patterns of production, consumption, and transfer of household services from women and men during the life cycle. And for now, it was calculated as hours per day. And for women, the surplus peaks around the age of 30, almost 3 hours per day, while men, on average, never produce a surplus. Their household consumption is always larger than their production. So as expected, they are net consumers of unpaid housework in Brazil. From now on, we turn our attention to the net time transfers. Considering that Brazil is such an unequal country, we believe that it is essential to go beyond those average profiles and measure time transfers by population subgroups. So in the next sections, I will talk only about net time transfers. Here we have the age patterns of transfers of household services from women and men, but now considering their level of education. The darker the curves get, I think someone with the micro open, it's returning.
Hello, please, let me try to figure out who it is. But,
Thank you. Thank you.
We're good now.
Thank you. So the darker the curve gets, the curves get, the higher the level of education is, measured as years of schooling, 0 to 8 years, 9 to 11 years, and 12 or more. And these results reveal an unequal pattern among Brazilian women. Women with low education generate substantial surplus. Their life cycle surplus peaks around the age of 25, of almost 4 hours a day. And for men, there is no significant difference. They are on average net time consumers during all the life cycles and at all educational levels. And for this reason, we keep investigate only women in the next slides. Now we consider both race and level of education in Brazil, comparing Black and white women. We can see that education is an important variable for understanding time transfers in Brazil. Despite the known difficulties for Black women in the Brazilian society, education seems to act in the same way for white and Black women. A higher level of education seems associated with a lower transfer level and a later pattern for white and Black women. For better understanding the situation of women in Brazil, in this graph, time transfers per week were grouped. So women were classified according to the amount of time transferred per week. So first we have net consumer, women who consume more household services than they produce. The second one, women who transfer between 0 and 10 years a week. The next, women who transfer between 10 and 20 hours a week. And the last one, women who transfer more than 20 hours a week, a situation that tends to compromise their participation in the labor market. And this graph shows the distribution of women among these groups of net time transfers in hours per week by which race group. So on the left, we have Black women. On the right, we have white women. And the first point to highlight is that the most frequent situation for Black women in Brazil is transferring more than 20 hours a week. 1 in 3 Black women in Brazil transfers on average more than 20 hours a week of unpaid housework time to their families. On the other hand, the most frequent situation for white women in Brazil is transferring between 0 to 10 hours of housework per week. 35 of white women in Brazil are in this group. Clearly, these two groups diverge so that Black women are more affected by unpaid housework in Brazil. But since the access to education in Brazil is not the same by race, we estimate a model to access the effects of social, demographic, and family variables on deficits in time transfers for women. So this graph shows the coefficients of model for net time transfers, hours per week. So this is our answer. And it was estimated for women who were household head or the spouse of a household head, and they were 18 years old or older. All the coefficients were significant at the level of 1%, and the control variables are age, educational level, race, place of residence, number of residents in the household, and the presence of members who demand domestic work. They are spouse, children, and elderly. Consider women at the same age. We see higher education is associated with less time transfer per week. It was the only variable with positive effect. Education in Brazil is associated with access to labor market and income, which are used to hire domestic workers and other services that reduce the time women dedicate to domestic work. In this family of women with higher education, the demands are met in part by paid domestic work in Brazil. What is also notable is that the presence of a spouse is a factor that increases time transfers made by women in a more expressive way than children in the ages between 6 and 14 years old. This is a new result for Brazil. And as expected, the presence of children aged 0 to 5 years old has a high impact on time transfer. Pre-age school children demand on average 15 hours more per week from women. And finally, we have the result of work specialization by level of education. The graphs show the average difference in working hours, market, and unpaid care work. Reinforcing our hypothesis and the previous analysis, we see that education plays a role in shaping specialization patterns in Brazil. The degree of work specialization decreases with education. Women dedicate more hours to market activities and fewer hours to unpaid activities as the years of schooling increase. It can also indicate how the time women with low education spend in household production is a barrier to paid work time and certainly to access leisure and time for getting more education. We don't have a time use survey, but we can conclude it. Young women in the group of low education can spend 30 hours more in unpaid household production than men in the same group of schooling. And this amount of time, 30 hours per week, correspond, for instance, to a part-time job. So adjusted time user data are of great value to improve the analysis of the gender economy in Brazil. Although a single question collected at Piedad, our survey, allowed us to estimate NTTA, Brazil needs a national time user survey. And not surprising, Brazilian women are net transfers of time and men are net consumers. But we can see significant difference emerge when we look at the socioeconomic context. In Brazil, where income inequality is high, the gender specialization is strongly related to education. One explanation is the access to market services. Housekeepers, daycare, laundry, eating out services are more accessible for wealthier families. And since there is a strong economic component associated with the racial question in Brazil, Black women face greater unpaid work burdens. Public policies could relieve those differences, not only among men and women, but among different women. But as I said, they have not been sufficient to support more impoverished families and their demands of unpaid care. And concluding, I would like to talk about the situation of COVID-19 in Brazil. We have some current problems and future concerns. First, we have seen significant drops in female participation in the labor market. 81% of formal vacancies suppressed from January to September last year were occupied by women. COVID-19 has amplified women's unpaid work burdens, particularly among vulnerable groups of women, low-educated, Black, and women with children at the household. And there are also a concern about young women who need to drop out of school to take care of housework. And we believe that the analysis of short-term and long-term effects in this type of analysis, the NTTA approach will be very helpful. And as future research, we plan to continue examining at the same time both age profiles and models based on microdata. On a different front, we plan to examine the extent to which wealthier families buy time by hiring housekeepers and how this help and how this market of housekeepers and this kind of services helps to increase gender conflicts in Brazil. Thank you. And the message, we need a detailed time use survey in Brazil.
Thank you very much, Jordana. Great presentation. We have good time for questions. Anyone with a question? You go first, Gretchen, or?
If anyone else has a question, they're welcome to go. I don't want to hog all the questions.
No, please, you first, and then we go.
Okay. So the slide that shows the net time transfers by education, so more educated women are making smaller net transfers, less educated women are making greater net transfers. So is that related to fertility? That they have more children in the household, so the demand for care, the need for care is greater. And I mean, I ask because that's sort of the case in the US, that generally higher education goes with lower fertility, but that relationship is weakening over time. So I don't know what the situation is in Brazil.
Okay, thank you, Donehower. We have seen in Brazil a very fast decline in fertility levels, so we do not have as much difference as we should observe, but I believe that yes, you are correct, we should look at the number of children, and we are trying to do this with our models based on microdata, so this is one of our next steps, to consider not only the presence of children, but also the number of children at the household that must play some role in the time transfer done by women. Thank you for the suggestion.
Anyone, or I go first? Jordana, I'm interested about the, hello? I'm interested about the figure you gave of 1 in 3 Black women devoting more than 20 hours to household production time. And I'm interested if that has to do, because if you have, I mean, you didn't do it here, but if you have thought or been able to disentangle whether this is a matter of poverty, which of course is correlated to race, but or is it a matter of explicit or maybe implicit discrimination within the household because of some kind of notional norms, where in these communities they might find that the woman must not work, which, you know, it would be kind of more complicated to deal with, I think, than if it's just kind of issues of poverty, which is not easy to, but probably more direct to deal with.
Thank you, Tovar. This is a great point. It's really complicated to talk about racial issues in Brazil. We have a very complex society. But first, what we can see is that Black women, generally, they have low education levels. They have less access to credit. So as they have less access to credit, for example, they can have more difficult to buy wash machine. So everything in Brazil is about race. So even when we have women at the same level of education, we can see that racial sometimes still play some role in discrimination. But what we can see is that when we go to the models, microdata-based models, the race is not anymore significant. So what is significant is education, because education is associated with being in the labor market. But we have some evidence. It's difficult to study because we don't have national time use survey. So we have many studies that we are doing based on the single question. For the first time now, we know what kind of activities that people do at the household, because we have now a new survey, but we do not have the time. So we are trying to do our best with the single question. So the single question is, what is the total amount of time you spend in household activities? But with these results, we have some studies showing that, for example, if the Black woman has a higher income than his husband, then she probably does more housework than a white woman with the same education and same level of income, because this in Brazil is not seen as a good thing. So it's not good in Brazil when Black women stand out. So they are penalized in the household to try to overcome this as a negative point they bring to the marriage. It's really very complicated, the situation in Brazil. And we have some evidence, but we could be sure about this only probably getting a national time use survey. So I'm not sure exactly how big is this question about racial in intra-household allocation, but we have some evidence that this plays a role outside the household and inside the household in Brazil.
Thank you. We have a question in the chat from Latif. He says, at technical level, can you confirm that the methodology you use at micro level is not change the structure of the original data? So I guess it's talking about the inference that we made with the Colombian data and how much do you trust that calculation?
Okay. This is a good question. Because when we choose this method to try to do some analysis with NTTA for Brazil, we were trying to get some method that keep our characteristics. So of course that we are using a reference population that is the Colombia population, but the only relation we are inputting to Brazilian data is, for example, we have one household where we can observe 5 hours a day of household services, and we did not collect time of childcare. Within a household with 5 hours of household services and this type of education, this type of household residence, what are the time related to this 5 hours we can see in Colombia? So for example, for this 5 hours, women in Colombia do 2 hours of childcare. I'm sorry. So we have 2 to 5. This is the relation we can observe. But the number of hours, they are from the Brazilian data. The only thing we're trying to understand is related to this context inside this household, considering this kind of adults being or not being in the house in the labor market, how much time they could be doing, but we are not being able to get from our research. So of course, when we choose a reference population to do standardization in demography, we have this risk, but we believe that the risk is low because we are really using only a relationship between activities that are related. For example, the number of children increase the number of hours of household services. They are really related. I'm not sure if I could answer.
I think you did, but I don't know, Latif. But he has another question, and he's asking: is it different social norm in Brazil for white women and Black women, or it exists a dominant social norm for both? So I guess, yeah, that really nice topic. I love that.
Yes, we have, it's really difficult to talk, as I mentioned, it's really difficult to talk about the situation in Brazil because you cannot just think about race without thinking about gender and without think about the group in the society you belong to. So, for example, it's not the same if you are a Black woman in Brazil and you are and you have low educated, or you are Black women in Brazil and you have a higher education level and you have access to other spaces and other opportunities. So what we have done in Brazil is try always at the same time to look at gender, race, and some proxy for class in the society. So, but it's really complex. For example, it's not the same around Brazil. So if you are in the south of the country, the norms, they are more influenced for the migration of Europeans. And if you are in the north of the country, we have a very mixed society, considering that we have indigenous. It's not that simple, but the better way to understand this is to look at the same time, income, gender, and race, for example.
Okay, great. Since we have just 1 minute, I have a very short question because why doesn't Brazil have a time use survey? It doesn't make sense. I don't think it's a matter of money. We have great data here, and we are certainly have less money probably, and similar technical abilities. I don't know why don't you have that? You can say that in a minute before Gretchen talks.
Okay, we do not have, but we are trying, at least in the last 20 years. So the first time we have some information, it was in 2001, when we started to ask about total time spent on housework. So we have this information every year. So this is a rich information. I did not talk about this, but we can see, for example, if we are in the better moment of the economy, what happens with the household production? For example, we can see this for Brazil because we have 15 years of information. And I think that we have decided to have the information during more time and not a more detailed information in some point. But we have tried some tests. They were never publicized. And now we have a very, the worst moment, I think, to get this kind of information in Brazil. So I believe that we have to use this type of information that's simple, but is the only information we have. But we have tried, Tovar, including the social demand. A lot of groups of women in Brazil demanding this kind of information, but we have not advanced.
Okay, thank you, Jordana. We are pleased to have now Gretchen, who directs this world project. She's going to talk to us about lessons learned from the Counting Movements project. Let me introduce you to Gretchen first, for those who don't know her very well. Gretchen is an academic specialist and researcher with the Center for the Economics and Demography of Aging at the University of California, Berkeley. Her work focuses on measuring the generational and gender economies of the National Transfers Account project. She is the principal investigator of the Counting project and international effort to measure the gender economy, including market work and unpaid care work. She earned a PhD in demography from the University of California at Berkeley. So please, Gretchen, we are ready.
Thank you very much to the organizers for hosting this event. Thank you all attendees for your attention. Lessons learned from Counting Women's work. So my colleagues who've spoken previously have looked at specific countries and as getting to help coordinate the global effort to bring the unpaid care work and gender dimensions of the economy to the National Transfer Accounts project. I get to have a view across all the countries. So I'm going to talk generally about the patterns that we've seen across all the countries that have been, that have been involved in the project, and then what the overall policy lessons are. So I won't talk about specific policy analyses, because I think those necessarily have to happen at the country level, because that's where policies are going to be enacted, and that's where analysts and researchers will be able to focus on the most important parts of the research, but there are sort of general lessons across all of the countries. So there we go. So what have we learned from counting women's work and the national time transfer accounts? Overall, we've been able to document the size and importance of the care economy. So I have these 6 points here, and after just going over them, I'm going to show you some charts that are evidence of each point. So it's big compared to the market economy. It takes up a lot of the time and resources that we're putting into production. Most of it is unpaid. Most of the work is done by women. The age patterns of care production differ quite a bit from country to country. So the previous 3 points were broad similarities across all countries, but when we look specifically at the age patterns of the care economy, there are some important differences. Unpaid care work creates the future. It's the first building block of human capital. So that's an important part of what we're documenting here, I think, is how much unpaid care work goes into children. And then in terms of thinking about the generational economy, the age nature of the care economy, we find that young children are care expensive, whereas older people are much less care expensive than you might think. And many of them, in fact, are net care providers. So they're not just not expensive, they are actually generative, providing care transfers to others. So this is an important finding because it's a very different finding than when you look at who is giving and who is receiving in the market economy. So in the context of population aging, it's important to understand what dependency means in the whole economy, not just the market economy. So to just show some pictures documenting my claims, the care economy is large in terms of the time we all spend working. So what you're looking at here for a group of countries that are in the project is the proportion of total work hours in the country that are unpaid care work versus market work. So unpaid care work is in red and market work is in blue. So you can see that for many countries, it's more than 50%. That dotted line down the middle is the 50% line. So more than 50% of the amount of time, total time spent on work is in unpaid care work. And even down at the very bottom, so Ghana, Thailand have the lowest proportion of total work hours spent in unpaid care work. It's still significant. The lowest level is Thailand, and that's about 30%. So this is a huge amount of time that we are spending of our total work lives on this type of work. And it's a really huge amount of time of our work lives to spend in work that doesn't get measured as part of the economy in most measures, traditional economic measures like GDP. It's big in terms of money. So we saw in some of the presentations earlier that sometimes we are discussing the time transfer accounts in terms of time units, and then other times we are using an imputed wage to value that time. So how much would you have to pay in a market wage if you were to purchase that service instead of provided on an unpaid care basis? So these bars shows the percent of, the relative size of the unpaid care work economy in those monetary units compared to the gross domestic product. And I think Latif had some of those values in his results for Senegal and Burkina Faso. So you see that for the countries for whom this is highest, it's over half, it's over 50% the size of the paid care work economy relative to gross domestic product. Even at the lowest level down at Ghana, it's above 10%. So, and that little star over on Vietnam was when we were using two different ways to value the time, the imputed wage. So either a minimum wage, that's the higher bar, the statutory minimum wage value, versus the yellow star there is what you would get if you valued the time by an informal market wage for domestic services. So this is part of some new work that I'm doing with colleagues in Korea, so the time transfer accounts are about measuring the unpaid care work economy, but in future work, we would also like to understand the paid care work economy, so part of the market economy that is involved in providing care. And what we see here for the United States and Korea is the distribution of total hours, aggregate hours of direct care. So for the time transfer accounts, that's the direct care for children, older persons, and disabled persons. And that's compared to the number of hours in the paid care work economy in red. Those small slices in red are for less credentialed occupations. So these are home health aides, childcare workers, and in a household, sort of domestic servants. And then in green is sort of the more credentialed paid care work occupation. So those teachers, nurses, doctors, social workers who typically spend many more years in formal education and also have higher licensure requirements in order to perform those occupations. But what we see is even when we tried to dig out all of the hours spent in those direct care paid occupations in green and red, it's dwarfed by the direct number of hours in direct care on an unpaid basis. Most of this work is done by women. So if most of the care economy is unpaid, most of the unpaid care economy is done by women. Actually, most of the paid care economy is done by women too, but I don't have the picture of that here. So what you're looking at here is a share of men's and women's time in providing care and housework. So the proportion that is provided by men is in blue, for women in red. And this is quite a few. This was from work done with European colleagues. So a lot of those countries are European, but not all of them. But you can see that all of the red dots are above the 50% mark and all of the blue dots are below. Although there is a pretty big range in how far apart those dots are. But as a broad certainty, most of unpaid care work is done by women. Now, while those first 3 points were about broad similarities across all of our countries, this shows some of the differences in the care economy. So what you're looking at here are per capita age profiles, so the average for each age group of time produced in unpaid care work. So that's total, including direct and indirect. And so for women in the solid lines and for men in the dotted lines. And I think it's very interesting to note that there are some patterns, countries such as India here, Mexico, whoops, I went forward by accident, sorry about that, Senegal, and Turkey a little less so, but they have these strong peaks at the younger ages where there's the most intensive childcare demand. Then there's a group of countries like Germany here and Mongolia, Spain a little less so, but certainly Vietnam and the US also, that have sort of a double humped shape. And so the first peak is for women in the most intensive child caring, child rearing ages, but then we see another peak later on in life, and that is grandmothers taking care of grandchildren, supporting their daughters and sons to have greater market work. And also it's older women who on average spend a pretty decent deal of time taking care of their older, potentially less frail, more frail spouses at the end of life. So this certainly speaks to older women's productive capacities in the care economy. That speaks to their productivity, and it potentially also speaks to the vulnerability that they have perhaps to their own health or care needs when they're also providing care to other household members and community members. So moving on to the next sort of broad result, unpaid care work creates the future. Unpaid care work is the biggest component of consumption to very young children. So what this chart is showing, and this was a group of 17 countries in the Counting Women's Work project, is if we take the estimates of consumption in the child's first year, and this is on a monetary basis, for market goods and services and unpaid care work, so because it's monetary, this includes an imputed wage for the care that young children are consuming, 90% of what is consumed in the first year is unpaid care work, compared to only 10% of market goods and services. So if we are thinking about any policy about human capital development or the costs of children, then we have to include the unpaid care work piece, because that is most of what young children are consuming. And then this is sort of another way to look at this. So in the previous slide, I was discussing unpaid care work for young children as investment, which certainly it should be. But for other policy questions, we might want to think of who is care expensive, who is consuming the most care. And so what you see here is the average hours per week in net unpaid care work time consumed. So that's consumption minus production. So above the zero line in black, you are a net consumer, you're consuming more than you produce. Below that line, you are net transferring, to other groups. So we can see here that in every single country, youngest children are the greatest net consumers of unpaid care work time. Adults are the greatest producers of that care time, but then it's very interesting to note that many older persons up to the very oldest ages are making net time transfers. So why should we care about all these empirical findings, and what do they mean for policy? So I have sort of 4 broad points to discuss on that. So one is that the unpaid and feminized nature of this kind of work means that it is involved in a lot of policy blind spots. Typically, something that is unpaid is easy to ignore. Something that is generally feminized, generally done by women, also traditionally has been outside of a lot of economic and policy studies. So the COVID-19 pandemic is a huge example of this dynamic. There are, granted in my country, the United States, we didn't really follow it for the first part of the pandemic, but there are sort of file drawers full of plans for pandemics. And the care economy did not figure very much in those plans. They were mostly about how to quarantine people, how to develop and distribute vaccines and those kinds of matters, but not about how the complete, the very sudden absence of a lot of the care economy, the paid care economy certainly, was going to affect other aspects of society. So, and now there's a big worry in my country and many others that economic recovery, now that in many places where the virus is receding, is being slowed because the care economy is still impacted. We also heard from Latif about that potentially there's underinvestment in infrastructure. So if plans to pipe water in Burkina Faso are only looking at the benefits that will be derived in the market economy from those efforts, there is definitely an underinvestment in that infrastructure. If you're not looking at the 6% of GDP that is spent, or the size of the work that is represented by that 6% of unpaid, relative to GDP of unpaid care work, you are underinvesting in those efforts. So what to do about this? And I think Jordana expressed this very eloquently. Support time use data collection and dissemination. we have to make this kind of work more visible. And in order to make it more visible, we have to measure it. Support research on the care economy and embed care in policy documents, tools, and plans. So when Latif discussed Senegal making care work research part of its formal legislative agenda, that's a really important policy move that this research supports. So when we saw the pictures of the age dimension of the unpaid care work economy, we can see that aging populations free up time in the short term, but will cost time in the long term. So demographic transition is about the fact that as fertility and mortality falls, a population has a chance to move to a higher growth path by investing more in the demographic groups that are going to move through the population age structure in their most productive years. So we have a similar dynamic in the care economy. So in the market economy, the demographic transition idea and demographic dividend idea is you want to get rich before you get old. And we can make a case for the same argument in the care economy. So what to do about this is to project future care needs, is to make sure that many countries have machinery to protect their future labor force. And we need to make sure that in those analyses, there is a carve out for the care economy, that we're looking at that specifically and not just sort of subsuming it into the larger workforce. Also, the unpaid care workforce needs to be part of those kinds of analyses and policy planning. And then the policy needs to address the freed up time from lower fertility. So we saw how expensive kids were in terms of time. So as fertility falls and we have fewer of them, what's going to happen to that time? In some places, that's going to relieve time poverty for women if they have less time that they have to devote to care expensive children. In other places, we might want to support policies that turn that time from childcare into market labor, or we might want to try to support policies that actually turn that time into more intensive human capital investments for a fewer number of children to potentially receive greater demographic dividends down the line. And then the last point, I think it's my last point, that I wanted to make about policy implications is that policy to increase female education and labor force participation work better if they are care aware. So if I'm trying to grow my economy and I'm sitting in the Ministry of Planning or Finance and I see women as a potential way to increase my labor force in the face of population aging, I need to incorporate the care responsibilities they already have in my policy planning. Those women are going to have more barriers than men in accessing paid work and education. And Latif mentioned this as well, that care responsibilities as a barrier to education. So the world has done an amazing job at reducing gender inequality in access to primary and secondary education. The new challenge is to continue that work up. Oh, yeah.
2 minutes, I guess.
Thank you. Okay. Is to continue that work in making more access for women in tertiary education in many countries. Although I think Piedad did mention that in plenty of countries now, actually, it's the opposite dynamic, that women are more likely to get college education than men. But in places where there's a distinct gender gap for women, their care responsibilities may be part of their barrier in accessing higher education. So are you going to provide daycares on college campuses? Are you going to have more flexible scheduling that can accommodate those responsibilities? So what to do? Plan to reallocate women's care time to men, or to paid care providers. So a paid care provider example was, as I discussed, having more childcare options on college and university campuses. And then, oh, okay, I did have one more. Survey, but can we use that type of data that may be able to be gathered much more cheaply and with much higher sample sizes to ask and answer the same kinds of questions that we have with the data that we've had in the past. So that's it. Thank you very much. And sorry for the extra minute.
Gretchen, thank you. Yeah, we went a bit more because we have a short break right now. Any questions, please? I have questions, but I would appreciate, well, yes, actually, I was really interested in the exercise you are doing with Korea, where you get this 90%, right, unpaid care work in the total share of caring activities. Because there is a debate in Colombia and in many countries, I guess, about you know, poverty and stuff. And one of the issues that are being thought about is universal basic income. Maybe in an unconditional way, there is a theoretical and empirical debate whether it's better to do it conditional or unconditional. But looking at that picture you had, I would say that maybe we should incorporate into the policy debate in terms of these you know, assistance that are coming to households to actually help the unpaid caring economy. Maybe you don't want, I don't know, this is maybe you want to actually just pay for these caring activities because it has a direct impact in terms of the gender gap, and it has a direct impact on children, which is what you really want, well, what you want to do. I don't know if you have thought about this strategy, maybe think about it in terms of, you know, I don't think Korea and the US are probably the best examples to, you know, we Africa and Latin America are probably better examples to try to think about that.
Yeah, thank you. And that's a really important issue. At one part, you want to make it possible for households to be able to optimize, to make their own decisions because they are the most knowledgeable about their own situation and what works best. At the same time, we know that if we inject money into a system and push play, we will get a lot of the same gender inequalities, gender patterns just enhanced. So what's the good thing to do? Now, this is of course not easy and requires the greatest resources, but if I could wave my magic wand, I would combine policies that are most prevalent in Scandinavian countries where things like parental leave, they have in some countries 3 parts. So you get a certain amount of time of paid leave when you have a child. There's some for the mother, there's some for the father, and then there's some that they can split or some combination thereof. Because we do know from research that if men take paternity leave, for the rest of the child's life, for the rest of the household's life, those men are more involved in household production. So that in some ways, and if you make paternity leave, so leave for fathers, a use it or lose it proposition, then that moves the needle on increasing household production by men without disadvantaging mothers, without making it just too easy to constantly say, hey, lady, you get to provide the unpaid care work because that's the way it's always been. So I if I said, as if I could wave my magic wand, I would have more use it or lose it paternity leave, and I would give more sort of just direct money support then to make it possible for households to make those decisions for themselves, but with a little more new thinking about who should be the one who's providing care and how should we decide how the care gets provided.
Thank you. Do we have another question for Gretchen? No, no one is excited. Okay. Yeah, no, I don't see anyone in the chat. No.
There was one thing in the chat earlier about that the UN Statistical Commission, someone mentioned, is convening an expert group on innovative and effective ways to collect time use statistics. So that's sort of what I was mentioning at the end there, that there is a greater recognition of the value of this kind of research and creative thinking about how we can collect it. And so hopefully that will generate new data, and we'll have to figure out how we can do our kinds of analyses with that new data.
Okay. We have a break now. Normally would be a coffee break. Now would be probably a bathroom break. So we will come again to listen to Juan Daniel Oviedo, and then for a round table. See you in 15 minutes, 12:20 Colombian time. So just don't get lost. Don't go too far. See you in a while. How are you doing, everyone? Great. Shall we start? Juan Daniel, do you hear me? Right. I lost Juan Daniel. Juan Daniel, how are you doing? Hola. DANE. El micrófono.
Are you listening to me well?
Oh, yes. So
okay.
we are very excited to have Juan Daniel to present the latest data for Colombia on time use. Let me first introduce for some of you only, I guess, Juan Daniel. Just a very short presentation that I did. Juan Daniel.
Don't take so long. Don't take so long because I want to speak.
He's currently the managing director at DANE, the Colombian Statistical Agency. He holds a PhD in economics from the University of Toulouse. And he has a strong link with the Universidad del Rosario, where he has had various academic and administrative positions. And so that's very short, Juan Daniel. Please, we're ready.
Thank you, Jorge, and a warm hello to all of you. First of all, I just want to confess that I'm very excited of being here and listening to this tremendous work that you are doing in order to show our societies that there are many things to be done in order to find a way gender equality drives a more productive and a more equal society. in our countries. And at the same time, as a chief statistician, I believe that this is one of the standing areas under which, as Gretchen, Piedad, Jordana, and Latif were mentioning before, more information is highly important in order to find evidence about what's happening in our societies, more importantly in regarding unpaid care work, which is something that drives very important inequalities against women in our society, not only from the economic, but also social and political perspective in our societies. And that's why I wanted to share with you a message under which we believe how we see that national statistics offices play an important role in this framework of national time transfer accounts. And to let you know that in Colombia, we are committed to doing our best in order to provide information which is equity oriented, gender sensitive, and at the same time granular and highly disaggregated in order to learn and to provide evidence to those important works that you have performed in the past. And at the same time, this topic arrived to me since I was appointed as a chief statistician here in Colombia, and taking advantage of the friendship that we have with Piedad and Jorge, I understood that there is a very important role of official statistics in providing information in this framework. There are 4 points that we wanted to address today. The first one is related with the project that we have with the technical directors of national accounts, Juan Pablo Cardoso, and of census information and demography, Angela Vega, in order to develop in Colombia an intergenerational transfer satellite account. At the second point, we wanted to show which are our main advances as regards the measurement of the unpaid care work in Colombia. And at the third point, we wanted to insist that there is a product that we are going to make available by the end of this year, which is the current time use survey that we are performing in Colombia under the supervision of Horacio Corral, which is the director of methodology and statistical production, and my advisor, Karen Garcia, who is at the head of the differential and intersectional approach of statistical production in the general direction of our National Statistics Office. And finally, we wanted just to show you which are the main challenges as regards demographic transition that we are facing in a country as Colombia, under which aging of our population drives important concerns about this intergenerational quality in our society members. Something just to get you in the context of our project. The keystone of this project was an important work that was developed by Jorge and Piedad that was published in 2018, under which, using the information of the Living Standard Survey of 2008, they developed a national transfers account for Colombia. And we went to the International Conference of Population and Development at Nairobi by the end of 2019, and we made visible our commitment in developing a national transfer satellite account in order to make visible the impacts of demographic transition in our society, not only from the broad perspective, but at the very detailed perspective that this framework allows us to grasp from the imbalances between income and consumption and between different profiles of members of our society. In 2020, we introduced, and as a National Statistics Office, we are the coordinators of the National Statistics System, and Colombia has a National Statistical Plan, under which one of the more important projects was the development of this national satellite account. And in 2021, we had the opportunity of ourselves. Just last week, we wrapped up a training session that CELADE, which is the demographic organism from the ECLAC of United Nations in America, Latina, and the Caribbean countries, and the Statistical Division, Population Division, in order to train our team, more importantly, the National Accounts team, the demographic team, and the, let's say, a general statistical production direction that we have in order to go to the hands-on of the satellite account that we expect to publish the main results by the month of November of this year. You have mentioned that before. It's a National Statistics Offices. We have a very important role here. We need a very detailed information of income and expenses. And we wanted to take advantage of this scenario to let you know that we have a very powerful and high quality income and expense survey, which is published at the microdata, duly anonymized, and that could be used for the techniques that you are presenting and the methodologies that you are developing in this working group. We believe that we should go also to the use of administrative records for statistical purposes. And we have a very important project of using the Social Security administrative record and the Social Security contributions of, let's say, formal, this half of the economy that Piedad was mentioning in her presentation, which is formal in our country, in order to complement the information that we develop from household surveys. And finally, the strength of a system of national accounts, which is duly standardized and sharing the main frameworks of national account systems of United Nations, is something very important. And we believe that we have a common place of those key factors here in Colombia. And we want to tell you and to let you know that we are open of sharing all this information in order to provide to this initiative more information in order to get detailed results about what you have been performing. And this is something to complement what I was saying before, is that we have a very powerful expenditure and income survey in Colombia, which is relatively recent, from 2016 and 2017, that is open in our open data website. And this could allow you to perform very detailed techniques as those that were performed by Jorge, Piedad, and Grande, that they are doing in their research work about this topic at the individual level, and with very important features in order to get several groups of urban areas under which you could have in Colombia, top cities or top urban developed areas and intermediate cities, and you have rural information, which is something very important to have a differential approach in this measurement of national time transfer accounts. And at the same time, our information of national accounts follows the more recent and widely adopted system of national accounts of 2018, and we have updated our national account system in order to have also information from the institutional sectors under which households play a very important role in this measurement of unpaid care work. When we are talking about our satellite account of the care economy, this is something that since the beginning of the last decade, we started to work due to a very important legal framework that we have in Colombia, under which the National Statistics Office has an obligation to perform a time use survey every 3 years and to incorporate the results of these time use surveys in the calculations of the system of national accounts. That's why we have the evaluation of unpaid care work, and this TDCNR is the acronym in Spanish, in order to get you familiar to this acronym that we are going to be using in the rest of the presentation. We have the production estimations, we have the production account estimations, and we have the extended work tables that are very important in order to provide the general frameworks of these estimations that you perform. Here, we have a consensus, something that is specific for Colombia, but we have already discussed all the morning about this topic. Women participation in unpaid care work amounts to 78.4%. And at the same time, we see how the more important allocation of time of women, and more importantly, in the functionality that we are seeing of unpaid care work, goes to food management and preparation, which is takes about 35.2% of the total amount of hours invested by men and women in unpaid care and domestic work here in Colombia. And this allows us to show that if it is incorporated in the national or in the system of national account, unpaid care work would be the more important economic sector in the Colombian GDP. It would be even more important than the wholesale and retail sector, which is highly important in Colombia, even more important than the public sector, or, for example, manufacturing industries or real estate activities. This is something which is highly valuable in order to empower the importance of the discussions about gender equality and the management or how public policy is going to address unpaid care work. When we go from the perspective not of economic sectors, but from the institutional sector perspective, you can see that in the production valuation of 2017, when we go to the production valuation of households measured as an institutional sector, you are going to see that more than 1/3 of the production valuation of households as an institutional sector is linked to unpaid care work, something which is very important in the perspective of national accounts of the role of unpaid care work. Taking as an example what Gretchen was mentioning from the broad perspective of 17 countries. Here to compare the weight of on domestic care work in the GDP, in the added value of the Colombian economy that amounts to 18.4% of the added value of the economy. And when you add up what's happening from the, let's say, paid care work from the health sector, education sector, and what we call domestic service, you are able to see that you cannot arrive even to the half of the role of unpaid care work in the aggregate economy of Colombia. And this shows, or something which is behind this perspective, that unpaid care work would be the more important economic sector in Colombia if included in the system of national account. It provides an evidence of an important gender inequality or a very unequal division of work between men and women in our society, under which, provided that women work more in Colombia, when we are talking about yearly hours worked by the working age population, we see that this share is very important about women on domestic care work, something which is highly relevant at the public policy perspective, but at the same time, that should be studied in a very detailed way, in a very detailed way, as you are going to see with our main results of the time use survey. When we talk about time use surveys, you remember in Colombia, we have a legal framework under which every 3 years we should perform a time use survey. And there is a, let's say, tremendous coincidence of this pandemic with the accomplishment of this legal mandate, under which we are grasping information in our time use surveys, which is going to be useful to show the role not only in the short term, but also in the medium and long term, as your framework and your methodologies allow to show of the unequal division of labor, more importantly, as regards as unpaid care work due to the pandemic of COVID-19. You are familiar with this topic, and what we are going to show to you is that even if the participation rates in paid or unpaid work activities by sex remain equal, here we are comparing the results for the 4 months at the end of year 2016 with the 4 months of the year 2020, because the time use survey is a yearly survey that is under production, but we managed to develop the sampling methodologies in order to make it standalone representative for the block of 4 months by the end of year 2020. So even if the participation rates are quite similar in unpaid work activities, what we see at the early beginning of the impacts of the pandemic is that it's highly probable that as regards as unpaid work activities, women are going to be working in Colombia 1 hour, 1 additional hour during the pandemic. On the contrary, men are going to remain equal in this very unequal division of labor as regards as unpaid care work, because in the average, every Colombian woman is going to work 8 years per day on domestic care work. On the contrary, the average man in Colombia just works 3 hours per day on domestic care work. So the gap is going to go from 4 hours that we had before the pandemic, following the time use surveys of 2016, and it's going to go upwards to 5 hours. And this is going to play an important role of hindering the participation of women in the labor market. And we are able to see the differential effects of the pandemic as regards as the division of labor, as regards as unpaid work. And you are able to see how for women, what we call the passive care, or to be aware of the rest of the functioning of the household, you are going to see how before the pandemic, women were allocating 6 hours, 23 minutes. And during the pandemic, between the months of September and December of 2020, this allocation increased to 10 hours. And these impacts, you are going to be able to see them in a very differential and very disaggregated way, under which, for example, you are going to see new features that could be incorporated into your research. For example, a new question that we managed to perform in the survey as regards as the average daily time per participant in purchasing and household management activities and the role of virtuality. So how we went online to do some tasks of unpaid care work. And this allocation is going to play an important role in a future research agenda in order to see how online is going to have an impact in the allocation of work or as regards as unpaid care work between women and men. And this is going to be very useful for your research agenda when you have the interest in a differential and intersectional approach. For example, we are able to develop differential measurements between urban areas and rural areas, as you are able to see in the current slide. But at the same time, you are going to be able to see differences as regards as, for example, every activity which is linked to the unpaid care work in our country. You are going to have information about perceptions, which is also very important as a context of your research agenda. And you are going to have evidence of the role of social norms in this unequal division of responsibilities between men and women as regards as unpaid care work. For example, in Colombia, you see that even in 2020, around 2/3 of the population, both men and women, agree on, or fully agree that women are better or perform better at housework than men. Something that is a gender misunderstanding of the role of women in unpaid care work, which lies behind a continuous set of imbalances that women are going to face, not only from the educational perspective, but also at their labor perspective or labor performance in our country. And these perceptions are going to be very detailed, that are going to allow you, let me just in 2 minutes wrap up the presentation, to have even differential approaches for a cultural self-identifications, for example, the role of what we call in Colombia campesinos or peasants or farmers. And this is going to be very useful in order to not only show the role of urban-rural gaps, but also self-identification or cultural associations of ethnicity, or for example here, what we call peasants or campesinos in our society. And finally, what we wanted to let you know is that we are able also to see how we are going to put things together in order to face this important demographic transition that the country is going to face between today and 2050, under which it's very important to see how we have been performing as regards life expectancy, both in male and female, but also something very important that I did not manage to translate, but this is the demonstration that probably by the year 2048, we are going to finish our demographic dividend, and we are going to face in Colombia a demographic tax, under which, as you understand, the dependent population is going to grow faster than the working population in our country. And this is something that is going to arrive even earlier for some specific areas in our country. And that's why we believe that the role of National Statistics Offices in this very important research agenda that I just wanted to congratulate your work and your advances is very important in order to provide sound, let's say, informational frameworks under which you could perform your methodologies. And we wanted to let you know that here in Colombia, we are more than happy of sharing all this information in order to let your agendas to advance at a faster pace, because we value very much the main messages that we have listened today in this workshop. Thank you very much.
And Daniel, thank you. I didn't interrupt you because it was so interesting. So what we can do is we just kind of merge the round table with questions to Juan Daniel. I am, as Colombian, very proud of what we are doing in the statistical agency. I think we are going way far from what we, what we have in what we can actually relative terms in terms of development. We are, I guess, Korea. Gretchen knows Korea is far away, but probably we are in a good direction in terms of introducing these new concepts to the people. I would any questions to Juan Daniel first? It would be great if we have any questions regarding his presentation. Yes, Gretchen, please.
Thank you. So it really is amazing and impressive how much of a commitment the Colombian people have made to collecting this kind of data, to having the time use surveys. And I would just like to hear a bit about how that came up politically. So how was it possible to do all this? Was it sort of grassroots support based on desires for gender equality, or is it coming from more sort of financial concerns about future labor force, or something else? I'd just like to hear your thoughts on that.
Thank you, Gretchen. This is something that we at the international statistical community, we believe that something that taking into account the main results that you shared with us, information empowers discussions that could drive changes in public policy. And in Colombia, we believe that the tradition to have a differential approach, for example, in labor market statistics, and this important role that Jorge and Piedad were performing even 10 years ago, shows that people could grasp a very important concern about the social cost of gender inequality in our country. And that's why the pandemic, even if it was catastrophic for the socioeconomic performance of our country, it got us conscious that in the recovery, we do not only have to think about how this recovery is going to be resilient or how the recovery is going to be strong or fast, but how it's going to be inclusive and how it's going to solve the main gaps that Piedad was mentioning in her presentation, that women face a very gender bias from the role, from the social norms in our country that play a very important role, not only in education, but also in labor force participation. And even they are more exposed to informality, which is a social vulnerability in our country. And currently, all the recovery plans that all the mayors, for example, in Colombia, they are developing, and the national government is trying to put this differential approach in order how to provide gender equality in the recovery of the economy. But this is something which is very difficult to make it effective if we don't have enough information about what's happening in every city or in every region of our country. And that's why our main effort has been to be very effective in disaggregating the information between the main top cities in Colombia, even from the gender perspective, in order to empower some local discussions about how the recovery is going to be inclusive, not only with women, but also with young women in Colombia that are were very exposed to the bad consequences of the pandemic in the labor market construction.
Thank you.
Okay, any further? I don't know. I have a comment which is not a question. Thinking which I haven't thought about it before. We are in Colombia ongoing some demonstrations against everything, and it's very politically biased. So I'm not going to get into that because I many Colombians and we probably won't end. But thinking about the data we just saw, I'm curious that I haven't heard much, you know, why are you in the street? It's normally young people, and they ask, and I've heard everything, reasons because of deforestation and of course the police brutality, and they talk about a bunch of stuff. But I haven't heard much about these gender issues in terms of, you know, they are, which is a big deal in our society and in our economy, and it has to do a lot with the, you know, in the short term and long term. You were talking about that. So I'm curious, why do you think that, you know, and I was, you know, combining this with a thing I saw in the press yesterday that only 26% or so of firms actually use data from the statistical agency. I wonder if young people, young women are unaware of their, let's say, of their place in society in the terms of how we are in society right now. And I don't know if how to have them look at the data and see the progress that there has been, but the road, the path that they should go. I don't know if you feel that maybe with the demonstration there have been more people looking at the data and your website or asking you, because I think it's much of what's going on has to do with lack of knowledge about data, about the information, about reality, you know, objective data. As I said, it's not really a question. It's really something I just came to mind from seeing your presentation. I don't know if you have anything to say about that. And we are recording, so you have to be careful.
No, this is what you say, Jorge, is highly relevant. We believe that we had an achievement last year because insisting on the topic, we managed to make policymakers conscious about the gender gap in unemployment rate, for example. Yeah, because everybody was concerned that, as Piedad was indirectly mentioning, women in Colombia, around 2/3 of women, which are part of the labor force, work in wholesale and retail, work on health and educational sector, and work in domestic paid work, which were the three main activities more affected by the, let's say, lockdowns and the measurements in order to manage the pandemic. So insisting on that and finding a way to make some very compact issues about how this inequality between women and men as regards as unpaid care work, and to make them visible is going to make the discussions to be more relevant for policymakers and to understand that this implies decisions, not only educational decisions, but also it implies specific decisions as regards of infrastructure, for example. How are we going to help women to perform their unpaid care work, even from allowing them to outsource this work or to finding more efficient ways in order to perform that. So it is something which is highly difficult, but we believe that the international statistical community is committed to allowing information to illustrate these type of discussions, which are highly important in our society. Thank you.
Do we have any more questions? I guess just to, we can talk about this a bit more, and you know, in terms of a bit of concluding, I'm seeing if Latif left, apparently, I don't see him, but there are some common patterns across the world, but there are some differential patterns also. And if you think about it, when we talked about Africa, we saw some very specifics. I was very impressed by the fetching water thing, the figures. I mean, 6% of GDP just to go and bring water to survive. It's outrageous. But so that's an issue there. In Brazil, we emphasize the issue of race, or at least I took it a lot. Race is a big factor in these gender gap differentials. While in Colombia, with Piedad, we have been thinking about this for quite a while. Informality is, I would put it like this, is the issue in terms of the whole economy, actually, of all our problems. If you want to quote me, I will defend my position vigorously. The problem of the Colombian economy and society is informality and all that it brings. So if you think about it, it's really something, every continent. So maybe Gretchen, which has the whole picture of the NTTA community, can help us in thinking, how can we bring together these differences, because you kind of did bring together the similarities, right? But how can we bring these differences to try to learn something that could help us, mostly developing countries? I guess we, you know, you have your own issues in the United States and in Europe, but you know, they're worried about less important matters, if you want to say it like that. We struggle to survive them here. So I don't know if you can say something about this, Gretchen, to kind of wrap up this whole seminar.
Well, I think that as you say, each country has its own particular history and configuration of its care economy, and the embeddedness of the data in the local context is necessary to make it meaningful for any policy purpose, and beyond policy, just for citizens understanding their own context. So I think that at a certain point, there are, I mean, it's such a big, in the global community, any statistical framework, the big watchwords now are sort of disaggregation and smaller groups, subgroup analyses, being able to get farther and farther away from the average person and more to a person embedded in particular context and what characteristics are most important to distinguish groups. So I think at the global level, there's not going to be a way to harmonize that or make that the same across countries. Each country is going to have the relevant divisions that it has. So that's why when we're sort of collecting the global data, we sort of go to this higher level of aggregation, because then we can compare. But at least in terms of how do we move forward, I mean, I think that what was in the chat before about the United Nations starting, gearing up its machinery to begin to really put resources behind investigating new ways to collect time use data is a very positive thing, because what these smaller and smaller groups require is bigger and bigger data sets. So if we are able to get, 100,000 pulse points of data about time use, that's going to allow us to say more about these small groups than 20,000 really involved time diaries across people. So I think that's one sort of future direction that hopefully we can, that will allow us to, in each particular context, to get the subgroups analyses that we need to make policy and to understand ourselves.
You. I would like to hear, Jordana and Piedad on a bit what they can take from the lessons of other countries to their own story. So Jordana talked about Brazil, very specific. I guess the biggest lesson for Brazil, I'm really excited about the data we have in Colombia, so you should do a timely survey. But what do you take from this experience in terms of your conclusions? And I would ask the same question to Piedad after Jordana.
Can I start? Yes. Okay, so one thing I would like to highlight about Brazil and this a very specific context, it's not only in Brazil, I think it's the same in Colombia. For example, when we try to put a wage to the time people spend in housework here, the level of income that those women are working in household services is really low. So what we have, for example, in a very context, in our very specific context in Brazil, we have many Black women, again, working in the paid housework services. So when we try to understand what is the amount of household production compared to the GDP, the percentage is only 10%. And why this number stand out? Because we have this specific situation where we have many women with low education working as domestic works, and as it was already mentioned, they were really affected during the pandemic. So they generally, when they lose their jobs, they cannot get jobs in other sectors, and so they're concerned. So this is one thing about Brazil. that maybe could also happen in Colombia. And Gretchen has mentioned that when we have the paternity leave, this could, for example, increase men household participation in the activities. And we have the same problem as Piedad has already said, informality. Informality is also a problem in Brazil. So we do not have paid leave, not even for women. So it's really difficult to try to think about those public policies in Brazil because, and I believe that also in Colombia, because we have really deep problems. And these problems, they add up. And that's why it's so important to look at specific groups. I think this must be one of the ways we are going to run here in Brazil.
Well, I'm really annoyed, to say the least, to see how consistent is the gender gap regarding the level of development. So it doesn't matter if you are in a very agricultural society like many African societies or in a very advanced society like the US. So this is just showing how social norms change and advance as the economy advances, but they are not the sole solution for an issue like this one. So we need policies and we need more help to solve this issue, because it's not enough just to have the social changes or the economic development achievements that we are reaching in each country. So that's one thing that really, as I said, annoys me or strikes me, and it's really like huge. And also, I was really very much impressed with Jordana's work for two reasons. First, it's really important to have the data. And as we all know, it's better to have data and not to have that rather than not to have it. But if you don't have it, we can probably find a way to approach the issue. So that's also very important because most of the countries do not have the data that we have, and that we have done a lot by having that information, and we should advocate for having the information. But just in case you don't have it, there are options. So it's a ripple effect to have a time use survey in Colombia, just to say something, you know. So it's very good for Colombia, but it's also helpful for other Latin American countries that do not have it. And the fact that she did the analysis by race or ethnicity, it's also very important, because as in the Colombian case, we are focused on the informality because it's a big issue in Colombia. Other subgroups, as Gretchen mentioned it, are also important to look at or focus at in our countries and in other countries, because as the discussion Jorge was leading, the subgroups that we are targeting are important to look at.
I have, you know, Gretchen wrote in the chat about the paid leave, which you do not have mostly in the United States. And I was wondering in terms of policy, how, I mean, I would say, I don't know if it's true, I would say there are very few, if any other countries that don't have a paid leave, whether developed or developing. But how is all this work helping on a debate that I haven't read, that I don't see it in the front of all other debates, policy debates. I don't know if it's really being discussed at the highest level, but you know how that debate is going on in the United States in terms of, you know, paid leave, something so normal for most of the world.
Yeah, we do. It has long been pointed out that the United States of rich countries is a complete outlier for this. In all countries, is a complete outlier for this. To have, you know, no statutory changes. We didn't even have anything about unpaid leave until the 1990s, when the Family and Medical Leave Act was passed. But I think actually now is the level of debate about care issues and childcare and sort of this unpaid side of the economy. I think it's a better time in the United States than it's been in a long time. So there is, in the most recent infrastructure bill that was proposed by President Biden, there was a big part of that bill which was recognizing care as infrastructure. So recognizing care as much a part of infrastructure, the care economy, as roads and bridges. You need to drive to work. You also need something for some care for your kids while you go to work as well. That those two aspects, enabling other kinds of market work, they're equally parts of infrastructure. So to even have that at the presidential level discussed in those terms is a real leap forward for the discussion of childcare and other forms of care in the United States. Now, of course, in the political process, that's going to get ground down, and there are plenty of people who are explicitly objecting to positing care as infrastructure. And but it's still at least a step forward that anybody at a national, the federal level was talking about it in those terms. And there are many people putting forward hypotheses about why we don't have this in the United States already. Some of it comes down to our race and ethnic divisions, that people think it's a benefit for someone else, and so they don't want to support it. Somebody else is having the kids in this particular country, and so I don't want to subsidize their kids. I only want to subsidize mine. Other people think that the United States has a much more sort of anti-government cast in a lot of our thinking and discussions, public discussions, that's too much of an intrusion of the government into individual household decisions. So certainly compared to European welfare states, the United States is much less amenable to having laws that govern those individual household decisions. Those are two possibilities of why we don't have this. But I do think we are coming around, and I think part of the reason we're coming around is because of the pandemic, and also because of worries about low fertility and people not wanting to have children because they're too expensive and because it's too hard to work and have kids at the same time. So in low fertility countries, and the fact that the United States is, slowly now below replacement fertility in the last decade, that's making the discussions around care change a little bit compared to the way they were historically.
Thank you, Juan. Daniel, please, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I just wanted to complement what has been said up to this moment. And what Piedad was mentioning is also very important. Yeah, we cannot say just we need time use service just per se. Yeah, because what we see is that there are several countries that perform time use service but unexploit the information which lies behind. Yeah, it's something that we were discussing at the international statistical community. You do not need time use service to show that X% of the GDP is linked to the unpaid care work. You can have indirect estimations of this gross measurement. But when you see the role of time use service providing the channels or the transmission channels under which the inequalities, or sometimes those invisible inequalities, that you see in the allocation of responsibilities at the domestic or unpaid care work inside the household. And you start to see how the transmission channels show effects in productivity, in gender pay gaps, in gender participation, or gender gaps in women participation in the labor force. You are able, we believe that you are able to materialize the gaps with solutions which are visible. For example, infrastructure, cross-subsidize, the role that a care is going to play in the, let's say, productive performance of individuals in our societies, or the role that care is going to play in the education of our children, understanding something that Gretchen was mentioning in her presentation. This is a keystone for human capital, and more importantly, human capital in the fourth industrial revolution, yeah, under which something which is not going to be subject to automatization is the social development that you have at the early childhood inside your household, or the intergenerational transfer of knowledge between elder population and youngsters in our countries. So the main challenge that we have with this information and with this kind of model is how we are going to make them visible in the economic performance at the micro and at the macro level, and how we are going to make also visible solutions to this problem. Yeah, because this is not an issue of feminism. No, it's an issue of productivity. It's an issue of development. It's an issue of equality in our society. And that's why, from the statistical perspective, we are seeing that it's very important to play these dialogues, for example, as that one that we are playing today, because it's important to see not only the policy perspective, but also the information perspective and the private sector perspective, for example, which is, and we need to make a single but powerful voice about this topic, putting together the elements that we grasp from the information, but also from the sociological perspective, but also from the productive perspectives, and to let the public policy frameworks to be illustrative about the disaggregation of the problem, as you are showing in your research agenda. This is something that I want just to highlight in the conversation. Thank you.
Juan Daniel, thank you very much. I think I'm very happy of the friendly conversation we had today. If you want to say something else, please do so. If not, I hope in some near future we can see each other, hopefully in Colombia. That was the idea at the beginning. Thank you very much, Jordana, Gretchen, Piedad, and Juan Daniel for your presentations. That's it. I have nothing else to say.
Thank you very much for organizing, and thank you presenters for letting me listen in. It's great work, and I hope that the global project will continue.
Okay. Yeah, we will upload at some point the seminar, and I'm figuring out how we had some requests to translate it to French, and of course we have to do it to Spanish. I don't know how good is the automatic translation in Google, so I'm trying to figure out if we can actually do it a bit better. At some point when we are online, I will send you an email, And when we have the translation, I will also send you an email. Okay, that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Thank
And just
you.
a round of applause for everyone. Thank you.
Ciao.